Welcome to the Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 Installation and Deployment course presented by Mohammed Wajid. This course will cover new features of SharePoint Client, so knowledge of previous versions of Microsoft Dynamics NAV is a prerequisite. This course was built on beta versions of Microsoft Dynamics NAV, so there might be some slight differences in the released product. Now, let me introduce Mohammed Wajid.
Hello and welcome. My name is Mohammed Wajid. Today I'll be showing you how to install and use the Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 SharePoint client. The Microsoft Dynamics NAV SharePoint client is built on the Microsoft Dynamics NAV portal framework for Microsoft SharePoint 2010, which is a web-based application framework that integrates Microsoft Dynamics NAV with Microsoft SharePoint applications. The Microsoft Dynamics NAV SharePoint client enables you to interact with Microsoft Dynamics NAV data from a Microsoft SharePoint website. By integrating with SharePoint, the Microsoft Dynamics NAV SharePoint client lets you take advantage of the business productivity and administration benefits in Microsoft SharePoint, including workflows, business, connectivity services, workspaces, SharePoint authentication, and scalability. Before we move to a demo on how to install the actual SharePoint client, let's have a quick look at the network architecture. The Microsoft Dynamics NAV SharePoint client is built on the Microsoft Dynamics NAV portal framework for Microsoft SharePoint 2010, which is a set of components that you deploy on the SharePoint web applications. You install Microsoft Dynamics NAV portal framework on a computer that is running SharePoint server. The following illustration shows the tiers and components of the Dynamics NAV portal framework network architecture. You have your client machines connecting to a SharePoint server, where the Dynamics NAV portal framework is deployed, which basically communicates with the Microsoft Dynamics NAV server computer running the NAV service, and the backend is running the SQL Server database, which has the Dynamics NAV database components. Looking at the system requirements for the SharePoint client, you would naturally need a client or computers for accessing SharePoint sites from Internet Explorer, a SharePoint server, which could be a server farm or a standalone server that is running SharePoint Foundation 2010 or Microsoft SharePoint Server 2010 that hosts multiple web applications and sites. Microsoft Dynamics NAV portal framework is installed on one or more web applications. Microsoft Dynamics NAV Server, a Microsoft .NET framework-based Windows service that manages communications and provides a security layer between clients and the NAV database on SQL Server. The SQL Server database that hosts the Microsoft Dynamics NAV data. Let's have a quick look at the demo of how we can install the portal framework. For the purpose of this demo, I have pre-installed Microsoft SharePoint Foundation Server as well as some of the NAV components, except for the portal framework itself. First, before I start the installer, let's have a look at my SharePoint website where we will be deploying the portal framework. So this is my standard default website on my SharePoint server. If I go ahead and edit this page, we can go to the editing tools and insert a web part. And you can see some of the categories here on the left side, which are pre-populated with the SharePoint installation. We do not have any category right now for Microsoft Dynamics now, but once we deploy the portal framework, we should have a new category and a web part that we can install and use. So I will go out from here, close this. We open the product DVD and run the setup file. Now, because I have some of the NAV components pre-installed, I'm presented with this maintenance window where I can either add or remove components or repair or uninstall them. I'm going to go ahead and click on add or remove components. You can see some of the components are pre-installed for the purpose of this demo. I'm going to select the portal framework for SharePoint from the list and then click on next. We do need to specify parameters for every component that we select. For the SharePoint components, there are 3 specific parameters that needs to be configured before we can deploy the portal framework. The web application is where you choose to deploy or install the portal framework for one application or all web applications on SharePoint server. The server name is where your SharePoint server is hosted. It could be a local host, which is the case in my scenario, or it could be a remote SharePoint server where you would like to deploy the portal framework. The port is specified when you're installing for one web application, and the port is different for that web application. For now, I'm going to leave that to default, and I'm going to deploy the portal framework for all web applications. We click on apply, and it will start installing the portal framework for SharePoint. It should be fairly quick to deploy the portal framework on the SharePoint server. Yep. So now we have successfully installed the portal framework for SharePoint. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Now that we have successfully installed the portal framework, I'd like to show you how we can actually use it. And before I do that, I just want to briefly touch upon who the SharePoint client is designed for. The NAV SharePoint client is basically designed for occasional users who typically need an overview of their daily work status and perform simple and light data entry tasks. End users working with Dynamics NAV data in a familiar SharePoint environment will feel at home. It adapts the appearances, the web part of your SharePoint themes, which we'll look at. Working with the Microsoft Dynamics NAV pages and reports in the NAV SharePoint client is very similar to working with the pages and reports in a NAV Windows client, for example, the RTC or the web client. Now let's have a look at how we can actually use the NAV SharePoint client. We'll try and insert a web part to access NAV data. So now I'll open the SharePoint site. We looked at the SharePoint site before where there was no web part, but after we installed the portal framework, we should actually be able to edit the page and go to the editing tools and try and insert a web part. Now you may see that there is an additional category called miscellaneous, and you'll see that there's a web part with Microsoft Dynamics NAV web part. All we need to do is click on add after selecting that web part, and once you do that, it will add a web part to your page like here. Now once that is done, we need to open the tool pane, or rather configure the web part to select an object that we need to display on this web part. So what we do is we'll go ahead and click on open the tool pane, and before you do that, we can make changes. We say OK to the web page so that we are no longer in the editing mode. Now we can see the Dynamics NAV web part on the right side. This is basically the page viewer, and we have a list of all the NAV page objects where of the data that we would like to see on the web part. We can simply select one of the pages. Let me go ahead and select like a customer card, for example, and I'll go ahead and click apply. Now what you see here is a similar experience to the RTC client or even the web client, where the company is initialized, and it will tell you this is a demonstration company. You click OK, and once you do that, the user will be presented with NAV data on the web part. There you go. So now what we've done here is we've installed the portal framework, we've inserted the web part on the default page, and after inserting the web part, we've configured it to show the customer card page object from the NAV database, and this is how it should look like. Now there are a couple of things that you can do with this web part. For example, you can see that the title of this web part says Microsoft Dynamics NAV web part. You could even go ahead and click on the edit web part to either choose a different page object, some of the properties, including this one right here, which says page caption overrides web part title. Now, when you select that, what it would do is it would change the Microsoft Dynamics Nav web part title to that of the page object. In this case, customer card. So if I select that and I click apply and OK, you will actually see that it would now give you customer card as a title, including the customer number as well as the customer name. So that in its simplest form is the web part, which fetches the NAV data from a NAV database. Like I said, it is really designed for users who need quick access for their daily tasks. They may be SharePoint users already, and there's much more that you can do, which we'll look at in a bit. So let me now one other thing that I wanted to show was this. The SharePoint installation has been done by the same user, one who installed the NAV components. And if we actually click from site actions and go to site permissions, you can see that this Windows user, I've actually have full control as a team site owner. The same user is also defined in Navision. If you want to give access to a different user, you can add them either in the team site owners or just team site members or team site visitors. You would obviously need access in the NAV database as well to use this web part and look at the NAV data. Okay, so let me go ahead and go back to the team site. That's where it is. What I have created here is a NAV subsite, a workspace with NAV, so that I can use this workspace to insert web part. Once again, I can click on edit the page. I can go to the editing tools and insert a web part. Now we have installed the portal framework for all web applications. So this web application is still on the same port, but if it were on a different port, I would still have this web part in the web part gallery. So I still have this web part. I'll go ahead and click on add, and it will add the web part as a base. Again, I'll click on open the tool pane, and I have a list of all the web part page objects which I can select. For now, I'm actually going to select company information just to add the company information that we're working with, relevant to maybe people who are working with a specific company. I'm gonna go ahead and save and close this page after editing. So now what we have here is we have a subsite called NAV, and this is the default page of that subsite. I've added a web part and selected the company information page object. You can even create site pages, just additional pages on this subsite, or you can create new sites and add more web parts, be it items, customers, vendors, and give access to people who work with those divisions. So it becomes fairly easy for them to just see and access only the information that they need. Now I mentioned earlier that these web parts would actually adapt to your SharePoint environment. So right now this is the default theme, but if I were to change the default theme and select a different one, I would go into site action settings, and the look and feel, I'd go to site theme and change the default theme to something else completely. Let's look at this one, which says K. So I'll apply this site theme, and once the theme has been applied, you'd be able to see that the web part that we inserted would basically adapt to the colors of the theme. So you have the titles here in green. This may not be the best theme to apply. I'm going to try that one more time. Bittersweet. Let's try this one. Well, that's nice and dark. right there. So just for demo purposes, you can see now that the web part actually adapts the theme of SharePoint. You can see the fields are even the same color as that of the theme header, for example. So I'm going to go back and actually change this to maybe no theme. Yeah, looks more cleaner now. The other thing with the web part is it has this search feature built into the web part. So if you actually click anywhere on the web part, you'll see a nice little Microsoft Dynamics nav toolbar, which you would also have on the Windows client for nav, as well as the web client. We'll look at that just a little bit later. Before that, I'd like to show you the search function. So if you click on General in the Microsoft Dynamics nav toolbar of the web part, you'll see there are some options here about Microsoft Dynamics nav, the help file, and this one, search for page or reports. You can actually click on that and it would present you with a window to search for a page or report. So now if I actually type here item card, for example, maybe just item, yep, you'd see that it will go and fetch the pages which are related to item. I'm going to click on items, the first one, and what it will do is it will pop up the page in a window where you can get a quick overview of the item list, similar to how you would see it in the RTC client, for example. It is also very similar to the web client, to the new web client, and from here you can just normally access everything that you would be able to from the RTC client, for example. And this is a very quick access to all the other pages from within the web part. You may not necessarily have to add each and every web part on the SharePoint site. You can quickly, access any desired page for reference purposes or anything like that. Now, it's not just restricted to, let's say you having a look at the item list. You can even go ahead and click on one of the items and it should open up the item card like that. There you go. So now you can see that you can pretty much edit that page itself, the changes of which reflect everywhere. It just goes and writes back to the Now database. This is currently in the edit mode. You can click on view and it will just be the view mode. So this is a very good feature from within the web part where you can search for other pages or reports and have a quick access anywhere across the Now database. Now, the similarities for this web part, as I spoke before, is it's very similar to the Nav RTC client as well as the web client. So if I do have the web client installed as well, similar experience again. As soon as you access the web client, you'll have the demonstration company initialization window. You click OK and you'll be presented with the role center that is assigned for this user. Now what we are trying to look here is similar to the web part that we installed, which is the company information. In the web client, again, there is a search for page or report function as well, very similar to the one on SharePoint for the web part. I'm going to look for company information. There. Now this is the web client, and this here, the web part that we inserted on the SharePoint side, has exactly the same toolbar, the Microsoft Dynamics Nav toolbar in the header. Now again, if we look here, you'll see you have the same home, actions, navigate that you can find even on the web part. So it has a very similar experience across the clients, and this even applies to the RTC client, for example. So if I open up the RTC client, we can search for company information, and you'll see that we would have almost about the same toolbar at the top with home, actions, navigate with the same responsibility centers, online map. Switching back to the SharePoint client, again you would have the same responsibility centers, online map, just like in the web client as well. The difference here with the web client and the SharePoint client is the web client actually presents you with the entire role center, while the SharePoint client is mainly intended for users who just want to perform light data entry tasks and information that they work with on a daily basis, and they may not necessarily need access to the entire role center as such. But the web client will give you the entire role center, just as how it does on the NAV RTC client. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, the RTC client, and this is the web client, which also I will close. So now we are back to the SharePoint site with our web part. Now, because the portal framework is installed for all web applications, you could create new sites or a new page and just go ahead, edit and insert web part, select a page object, and have access to the NAV information from the database as required. It's fairly easy to use, user-friendly, and quick, and it gives you a similar experience to the other clients that are available with Microsoft Dynamics NAV. With that, I have concluded the last part of this demo. We looked at the search feature on the web part. We've inserted a web part on a new page and site. We looked at how we can change the theme in SharePoint and how the web part adapts to that SharePoint theme. We looked a little bit at the comparison and difference between the SharePoint and the web client as well as the RTC client. The next thing is SharePoint client feature limitations. There are a few client feature limitations which are listed here. Most are because of browser limitations or such. Like general features include the chart part on page is not supported, some common automations or control add-ins on the client are not supported, the departments button doesn't appear, and so on. More of these details can actually be found in the Microsoft Dynamics help file. I've even listed that in the next slide for resources where you can look at. So these are the resources available as help file, which is installed with the Dynamics NAV client folder, devitpro.chm. They should have almost everything that is required in terms of deployment, more information about SharePoint itself, how you can install the framework, system requirements, and so on. The same information is also available for the SharePoint client and the portal framework on the MSDN library on this link. With that, I'd like to say thank you for watching this presentation. Just a quick recap. We talked about the new SharePoint client and the portal framework, how we can install it, how we can use it, who is the target audience. We looked at the search features on the web part. We looked at site themes and how the web part adapts to the site themes. We looked at the comparison and differences with the web client. And I hope this has helped you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for reviewing this course. Additional new features can be found on the Partner Learning Center. If you have specific questions on any of the features shown, you can contact the Partner Technical Services by emailing askpts@microsoft.com or by calling 1-800-MPN-SOLVE.